know, usually when we buy a new appliance, there is this underlying assumption of complete invisibility.
Yeah.
Bring home a toaster, you plug it into the wall, and your house doesn't care. The local neighborhood power grid certainly doesn't care. It's just, another wire drawing a tiny temporary sip of electricity.
It's a completely frictionless relationship. I mean, the utility grid was overbuilt decades ago, precisely so you would never have to think about the physical consequences of pushing down that toaster lever.
But then you zoom out and look at the electric vehicle transition, and suddenly that toaster metaphor it falls apart completely.
Yeah, it really does.
We aren't just plugging in a slightly larger toaster. When millions of vehicles with these massive battery packs plug in, the entire house and, well, the local transformer on your street feels it. It is a massive, highly visible shock to the system.
Exactly. It is a fundamental rewiring of how society consumes, stores, and distributes energy. And most radical parts of that rewiring are happening completely out of sight.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are looking past the shiny new electric vehicle models hitting the dealership lots, and instead we're investigating the invisible trillion-dollar ecosystem required to actually power them.
It's a huge topic.
It is. We are exploring the intense physics of how these vehicles will charge, who exactly is paying for the massive grid upgrades required, and how the rise of EVs might actually, reshape the economics of your own monthly utility bill.
It is a phenomenal puzzle, and what's incredible is how many distinct industries are colliding to try and solve it simultaneously.
Yeah, we have a great stack of sources today to help us figure it out. We're looking at a 2026 EV charging industry prediction report by DriveIs, a really comprehensive global market analysis from Fact.mr, a February 2026 press release from the U.S. Department of Transportation, and a March 2026 presentation on vehicle grid integration from the California Public Utilities Commission.
Lots of fresh data.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to understand how these cars interact with the grid, we first have to look at the actual physical hardware going into the ground right now.
The physical charges themselves.
Right. I was looking through that DriveIs report, and the sheer physics of these new chargers is staggering. We are moving way past the early days of slow charging. The report points out that ultra-fast charging, meaning stations delivering 350 kilowatts or more, is shifting rapidly into the mainstream.
350 kilowatts is massive.
It's huge. In the European Union alone, these behemoths already make up 20% of ultra-fast chargers. They can push a compatible EV battery to an 80% charge in just 15 to 20 minutes.
That kind of power delivery is an incredible leap, but you really have to look at the physical friction it creates. Delivering 350 kilowatts of electricity isn't just about, pouring a concrete pad and running a thicker copper wire. The internal mechanisms of these chargers are incredibly complex. They require massive, heavy-duty inverters to convert alternating current from the grid into the direct current the battery needs. The cables pushing that much power generate so much heat that they literally have to pump liquid coolant through the charging cable itself.
Wait, liquid coolant in the cable you hold in your hand?
Yeah, exactly. Just so it doesn't melt, and so the cable isn't too thick and heavy for a driver to physically lift.
Wow. Which I guess explains why the upfront capital expenses for a local convenience store or a gas station to install these are just mind-boggling. You're essentially asking a local fuel retailer to install the electrical equivalent of a small factory in their parking lot.
And that extreme financial hurdle is forcing the entire business model to pivot. The DriveIs report highlights this massive shift toward a turnkey model called Charging as a Service, or CUP.
Oh, CUPs, right.
Right, instead of the property owner buying the hardware, a third-party operator comes in, pays for the installation, maintains those liquid-cooled cables, upgrades the software, and operates the station.
So it turns a terrifying multi-million-dollar upfront cost into just a predictable recurring operational expense.
Exactly.
And DriveIs also notes that these operators are building multi-fuel hubs now, combining hydrogen, EV fast charging, and traditional fuels. They are designing these massive stations specifically to serve heavy-duty commercial fleets and, balance out the energy demand on the local grid.
It's a very smart financial maneuver to bypass that hardware cost. But there is a much larger bottleneck looming over the rollout of this infrastructure, particularly in the United States, and it comes down to federal policy.
I'm glad you brought that up because there is a major shift happening literally as we speak. I have that February 2026 press release here from the U.S. Department of Transportation.
Right, the new waiver rules.
Yeah. The current administration, under President Trump's Transportation Secretary Sean P. Duffy, just proposed updating the Buy America waiver for EV chargers. The new rule dictates that any federally funded EV charging project must raise its required domestic content from 55% to a full 100%.
That is a dramatic, immediate acceleration of domestic sourcing requirements.
It really is. Looking objectively at the DOT press release, the administration frames this 100% domestic requirement as a national security imperative. They state the policy is designed to boost domestic manufacturing, but also specifically to protect the grid against potential cybersecurity vulnerabilities hidden inside foreign-made components. They also explicitly frame this as a necessary correction to the previous administration's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, the EPAGE program. They state that the previous Biden-Buttigieg approach failed to deliver chargers effectively and that American taxpayer dollars should not be subsidizing foreign adversaries in the supply chain.
The intention laid out there is unambiguous. They want to sever the reliance on international supply chains and force the manufacturing to localize immediately.
But I have to push back on the logistics of this. Upgrading a station to handle 350 kilowatt power draws is incredibly complex, as you just explained.
Very complex.
Imposing a 100% domestic content rule feels like asking a local diner to instantly build a Michelin star automated kitchen, but telling them every single computer chip, liquid cooling tube, and piece of copper wire has to be forged within their own zip code. I mean, does the U.S. industry actually have the manufacturing capacity to meet a 100% domestic requirement overnight without completely stalling the rollout of these ultra-fast chargers?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the exact tension tearing through the energy sector right now. The policy provides a very powerful forced incentive to onshore manufacturing, which inherently hardens national security.
Right.
But the mechanism of building a 350 kilowatt charger relies on highly specialized components. Sourcing 100% of the high voltage inverters, the microchips for the payment screens, and the thermal management systems entirely from within the U.S. requires a massive supply chain apparatus that is still actively trying to scale up.
So it's going to hurt in the short term.
It forces a rapid transition, yeah, but that inevitably creates intense short-term friction in how fast these networks can physically get into the ground.
So if building out 100% American-made, liquid-cooled, ultra-fast chargers creates a potential bottleneck for the infrastructure rollout, what happens if commercial fleets just decide to skip the charging plug altogether?
Oh, you're referring to the battery swapping market.
I am, and the numbers here completely caught me off guard. There's this highly detailed global market analysis from Fact.mr that shows the battery swap-ready pack systems market is approaching a massive inflection point.
The growth curve is wild.
It is. They project it to grow from about $1.1 billion in 2025 to $12.5 billion by 2036.
Which is a 25.3% compound annual growth rate.
Yeah, but what really surprised me is who is actually using this. It's not for your average passenger car sitting in a suburban driveway. A massive 62% of this market is completely dominated by two-wheelers and three-wheelers.
Because when you look at the mechanism of last-mile logistics and ride-hailing, the economic use case completely diverges from a daily commuter. I mean, a commuter parks at an office for 8 hours. A delivery driver on a freewheeler does not.
Right. Time is literally money for those fleets. The report points to Amazon India, which made a commitment to deploy 10,000 electric three-wheelers with a mobility company called SUM Mobility. They can't afford to have delivery drivers sitting around at a charging plug for an hour or even 20 minutes.
No, the vehicle has to keep moving.
It's literally like going back to the old days of swapping out dead LA batteries in a Game Boy so you can keep playing immediately instead of, plugging the device into the wall and waiting.
That Game Boy analogy is actually a perfect way to visualize the mechanism at play, and the specific chemistry making that rapid physical swap possible is fascinating.
Oh, right, the LFP stuff.
Yeah, the fact MR report points out that lithium iron phosphate, or LFP chemistry, holds a 50% market share in these swap systems, significantly outpacing other chemistries.
I see LFP mentioned constantly, but why does a swap station specifically need LFP over the standard batteries we see in long-range passenger cars?
It all comes down to thermal stability and physical degradation. So most passenger EVs use a chemistry called NMC nickel manganese cobalt.
Okay.
NMC is incredibly energy dense, which is great for long road trips, but it is highly sensitive to extreme heat and rapid charging. If it is abused, it can experience thermal runaway, essentially a cascading fire.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's bad.
Now imagine a commercial environment where a heavy battery pack is physically yanked out of a vehicle and shoved into an automated charging rack 3 or 4 times a day. LFP chemistry is vastly more stable under that kind of physical and thermal stress. Furthermore, LFP can handle over 3,000 deep charge cycles with minimal degradation. It is quite literally engineered to withstand high-frequency commercial abuse.
And looking at the map, this high-frequency swapping is heavily concentrated in certain parts of the globe. Fact, MR shows China and India are aggressively leading the charge.
Yeah.
And this isn't just like organic free market growth, it's being driven by hard policy mandates.
The MIP targets, right.
Exactly. China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, the MIIT, is actually stepping in and setting specific swap station density targets for their cities. Meanwhile, in North America, we are seeing the transition move from small pilots to actual scale. You have companies like Ample securing agreements with massive players like FedEx and Stellantis to integrate modular swap platforms into their logistics fleets.
Logistics operators are demanding zero downtime, and swapping mechanically solves that problem.
But wait, I have to push back on this entire premise. This completely contradicts everything we know about how car manufacturers operate.
How so?
Well, historically, automakers are notoriously protective of their battery technology. The battery is the heart, the soul, and the main profit center of the EV. Why would an automaker ever agree to open up their architecture and let a third party swap their proprietary batteries in and out?
You've just identified the exact historical barrier that kept battery swapping in the dark for a decade. Proprietary lock-in.
Right.
For years, OEMs refused to play nice with each other, but the paradigm is actively shifting, and it's being forced entirely by the buyers. The Facterma report details a clear trend towards standardized, open-format modular packs. Fleet operators, whether that's a massive municipality or a global logistics giant like Amazon, are flat out refusing to be locked into a single manufacturer's closed ecosystem.
Because if the manufacturer goes bankrupt or, I don't know, raises prices, the fleet is entirely stranded.
Exactly. The fleet operators are demanding interoperability. They want their drivers to pull into any swap station on the corner, regardless of whether they are driving a Ford, a Stellantis, or a startup's delivery van, and swap the pack.
So the buyer has the power.
Because these commercial fleet contracts are worth billions of dollars, the automakers are finally being forced to adapt. They have to open up their architecture and use standardized modular packs, or they risk losing out on massive municipal and commercial contracts. The buyers are dictating the engineering.
Money talks. If the logistics giants say, we only buy open format, the manufacturers figure out how to build open format. So let's tie these two massive infrastructure shifts together. We have localized 350 kilowatt ultra-fast chargers pulling immense amounts of power, and we have automated commercial swap stations concurrently charging hundreds of heavy-duty LFP batteries.
It's a huge electrical load.
Here's where it gets really interesting. All of this electricity has to come from somewhere. What physically happens to the local neighborhood grid when millions of EVs, fleet vans, and swap stations plug in simultaneously?
That brings us to the hidden economics of the grid and a March 2026 presentation from the California Public Utilities Commission, or CPUC, regarding vehicle grid integration.
Yes, and looking at the CPUC data, there is a huge unintended consequence of how we currently try to manage EV charging. For years, utilities have relied on something called time-of-use pricing, or TOU rates.
Right, the off-peak discounts.
Yeah. They make electricity super cheap in the middle of the night to incentivize people to charge off-peak. But according to studies by E3 and Integral Analytics presented to the CPUC, these passive TOU rates are actually creating a massive infrastructure crisis. They're causing what the industry calls rebound peaks on over 20% of local distribution feeders.
Because human behavior, when guided by a simple financial incentive, is predictably uniform.
It's exactly like a department store holding a massive flash sale that starts right at 9:00 p.m. Everyone waits in the parking lot and then rushes the doors at the exact same second, causing a chaotic stampede.
That's a great way to put it.
In this case, millions of cars are programmed to wait for the cheap utility rate to kick in at 9:00 p.m. So at 9:00 p.m. and 1 second, millions of vehicles start pulling maximum power simultaneously, causing a massive, localized stampede on the neighborhood transformers.
What's fascinating here is the sheer technical complexity required to solve that stampede, because you can't just rely on a passive pricing sheet anymore.
It's not enough.
No, because the grid physically cannot handle a localized surge of that magnitude. Transformers need time to cool down at night. If they are hit with a massive load right at 9:00 p.m., they overheat and degrade. The CPUC notes we need locationally aware, active managed charging. Drivers also echoes this, noting that AI is going to be fundamentally necessary to orchestrate this.
But how does that actually work in practice? Like, how does AI stop a neighborhood transformer from melting?
To prevent the stampede, you need a flawless, real-time communication pathway. It starts at the utilities distribution management system, which monitors the exact temperature and load of a local transformer on your street.
Okay, so it's watching the transformer.
Right. If it gets too hot, the system talks to an AI aggregator. That aggregator instantly feeds a signal down to your specific home EV charger and finally communicates directly with the telematics inside your vehicle's battery.
Wow, all the way to the car itself.
Exactly. The AI orchestrates the charging so that cars in the same neighborhood take turns. It might seamlessly throttle your charging speed from 11 kilowatts down to 3 kilowatts for 20 minutes to let your neighbor's car charge, without you ever noticing a delay in your morning commute.
That is wild. And what blew my mind in the CPUC presentation is that this communication doesn't just go one way. They dive heavily into V2G vehicle-to-grid technology. This completely flips the concept of a car on its head.
It really does.
During peak demand, say, a brutally hot summer afternoon when everyone's air conditioning is running at maximum capacity, the utility can actually pull stored power out of your car's battery to stabilize the neighborhood grid. Drivers points out this is going to create recurring revenue for fleet operators. They can literally arbitrage the market by selling their stored LFP battery energy back to the grid when prices spike.
It entirely redefines the asset. A vehicle is no longer just a mode of transportation. It becomes a mobile, distributed energy storage unit that can be dynamically dispatched by the grid.
But orchestrating all of this mechanism, building the AI aggregator systems, physically upgrading the neighborhood transformers to handle bidirectional flow, installing all the communication lines, that is a profoundly expensive undertaking.
Billions of dollars.
Exactly. Which leads us to the ultimate question for you, the listener. Who actually foots the bill for this trillion-dollar grid upgrade? And could the rise of all these EVs actually end up saving you money on your utility bill?
It sounds deeply counterintuitive to suggest that building massive infrastructure saves money, but the economics of the power grid operate on very unique principles.
Let's look at the hard numbers from the CPUC presentation, specifically the PG&E Electrification Impact Study. PG&E estimates that simply achieving high electrification goals will require an eye-watering $23 billion to $31.6 billion in distribution investments by 2040.
Over $30 billion.
Yeah. That is just to physically replace the wires, substations, and transformers.
That kind of capital outlay typically terrifies utility regulators, but the study outlines specific levers that can drastically alter that math.
Exactly. The PG&E study shows that if we utilize that enhanced demand flexibility we just talked about, using AI to orchestrate the load and pulling power from V2G systems during peak events, we can artificially reduce system peak demand by up to 3.1 gigawatts.
Which is massive.
It is. That directly translates to avoiding $1.8 billion in physical infrastructure costs that we simply won't ever have to build.
And in the utility world, avoiding a capital infrastructure upgrade is the purest, most direct form of ratepayer savings.
But here is the major plot twist that the CPUC highlighted, and it is massive for anyone who pays a power bill. Yes, capital costs are inevitably going to increase in the near term to build the AI networks and the charging stations. But over time, the sheer volume of new electricity sales, because millions of cars and commercial fleets are now buying their daily fuel from the grid instead of the local gas station, more than offsets the cost of those upgrades. PG&E studies suggest that by 2040, this massive electrification could actually provide downward pressure on distribution rates by as much as 25%.
25%.
Yeah, that translates to a drop of about 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour.
It's the fundamental mechanism of a volume business. If the fixed costs of the grid are spread out over billions of newly purchased kilowatt hours, the cost per unit goes down.
So what does this all mean? Wait, so the data is genuinely suggesting that my monthly rates might actually go down in the long run simply because society as a whole is buying so much more juice that it easily pays off the new wires?
This raises an important question, and we definitely need to ground that optimism with a dose of economic reality.
Okay, let's hear it.
The PG&E study is highly precise with its language. It states that the distribution rate pressure is downward, but the overall power grid faces immense overlapping financial burdens.
Like what?
Well, the CPUC presentation includes notes from the Public Advocate's Office pointing out that other massive utility costs, specifically multi-billion-dollar investments in wildfire hardening and insulating lines, might completely eat up all of those EV-related distribution savings.
Oh, I see.
Your absolute bill might not actually go down, but the volume of the EV transition acts as a financial buffer against those other rising costs.
So it absorbs the blow of other infrastructure failures.
Precisely. And furthermore, the CPUC highlights an incredibly delicate balancing act that utilities have to master right now regarding V2G. To make those virtual power plants work, to convince you to let the utility drain your car battery during a peak summer event, the utility has to pay you a financial incentive.
Makes sense. I wouldn't do it for free.
But if the utility pays EV owners too much of a premium for their power, it acts as a tax on the system and erases the financial benefits for the general ratepayer who doesn't even own an EV. The utilities have to calculate the absolute perfect price point that incentivizes fleet participation without overpaying and shifting the burden to lower-income households.
It is a massive, high-stakes economic tightrope. So let's synthesize this journey. Whether you are currently driving an electric vehicle and plugging into a smart charger in your garage, whether you are waiting for a same-day e-commerce delivery that's being driven to your door by a three-wheeler running on a swappable LFP battery, or whether you are simply sitting at your kitchen table analyzing your monthly utility bill. This invisible infrastructure overhaul is happening all around you.
Everywhere.
It dictates your community's power resilience, it forces national supply chains to pivot, and it absolutely impacts your wallet.
We're fundamentally transitioning away from a century of passive one-way energy consumption into an era of highly active bidirectional AI-orchestrated energy management.
We've covered the physics of the chargers, the incredibly complex domestic supply chain mandates, the commercial battery swap revolution, and the underlying economics of the neighborhood grid. But before we go, we always like to look just a bit further over the horizon.
Indeed. We've spent this entire discussion exploring how electric vehicles might act as orchestrated virtual power plants to stabilize the local grid. But consider this final thought as we move rapidly toward 2030. We are simultaneously witnessing the absolute explosion of massively power-hungry AI data centers.
Oh, yeah.
What happens to local grid stability and the cost of your electric bill when millions of AI-orchestrated electric vehicles are suddenly forced to compete for the exact same local grid capacity as the AI data centers themselves at the exact same time? It is a looming physical collision of the two largest technological shifts of our generation.
That is a phenomenal, terrifying question, and definitely something to mull over the next time you plug any device into the wall. Because unlike that humble, invisible toaster we talked about at the beginning of our journey, the devices we are plugging in tomorrow are going to talk back, they are going to negotiate for power, and the grid will never be the same. In a rapidly changing world of technology and energy, there is always more to learn and unpack. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the invisible ecosystem, and we'll catch you on the next one.